The day I found my husband's mistress doing yoga in my living room, wearing my favorite silk robe, I knew my life was about to change forever. But what I didn't expect was that by the end of this story, I would be the one holding all the cards, and she would be the one packing her bags with nothing but the clothes on her back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 31 years old. For the past 6 years, I've been working as a senior marketing coordinator for a mid-sized tech company here in Austin, Texas. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well enough to contribute my fair share to the mortgage on our 4-bedroom colonial house in Westlake Hills. The house with the white picket fence, the perfectly manicured lawn, and the golden retriever named Cooper who greets everyone at the door with enthusiastic tail wags. From the outside, my life looked picture perfect. I had the successful career, the beautiful home, the loving husband of 8 years, and all the trappings of what society tells us we should want. Michael and I met in college at the University of Texas. He was studying business while I was pursuing my marketing degree. He was charming, ambitious, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the room. We dated for 3 years before he proposed at Laguna Gloria, the same place where we later held our wedding reception. Those early years felt magical. We supported each other through finals, celebrated each other's achievements, and dreamed together about the future we were going to build. After graduation, Michael started his own construction company with his college roommate David. They specialized in residential renovations and had built up a solid reputation around Austin. Business was good, and Michael was proud of what they had accomplished. He would come home covered in sawdust and paint, but his eyes would light up when he talked about the houses they were transforming. I admired his work ethic and his passion for creating beautiful spaces for families to call home. Our own home was a testament to his skills. He had personally overseen every detail of our kitchen renovation 2 years ago, installing custom cabinets and granite countertops that made me feel like I was cooking in a magazine spread. The master bathroom had been his gift to me for our 5th anniversary, complete with a clawfoot tub where I would soak away the stress of difficult work days. He had even built custom shelving in his home office, where he would spend hours in the evenings working on project proposals and reviewing blueprints. For years, our routine was comfortable and predictable. We would have coffee together every morning before heading to our respective jobs. I would pack him lunch, usually a sandwich, and an apple, which he would eat on whatever job site he was working that day. Evenings were spent walking Cooper around the neighborhood, watching Netflix on the couch, or working together in the garden that Michael had helped me design in our backyard. Weekends meant trips to Home Depot for whatever project he was planning. Next, followed by barbecues with friends or quiet dinners at our favorite local restaurants. The changes started so gradually that I almost missed them entirely. It began about 8 months ago when Michael started mentioning a new client more frequently than usual. Vanessa Chen, a 26-year-old fitness instructor who had hired his company to renovate the home gym in her downtown condo. According to Michael, she was very particular about every detail and required multiple meetings to discuss the project timeline. He would roll his eyes when he talked about her demanding nature, but there was something in his voice that should have been my first warning sign. The meetings started happening more often. Vanessa apparently needed to approve every fixture, every paint color, every piece of equipment placement. Michael would leave for these consultations dressed nicer than usual, wearing cologne that I rarely smelled on him anymore when he came home to me. When I asked about the project, he would give vague answers about how complicated the renovation was becoming and how Vanessa kept changing her mind about what she wanted. Then came the late nights. Michael had always been a hard worker, but suddenly he was staying at job sites until 9 or 10 in the evening. When I would call to check on him, he would answer in a rushed, distracted tone, claiming that he was dealing with electrical issues or waiting for a delivery that was running behind schedule. The excuses always sounded reasonable, and I wanted to trust my husband, so I pushed down the nagging feeling in my stomach that something wasn't quite right. Cooper started acting differently around Michael. Our golden retriever had always been Michael's shadow, following him from room to room and sleeping at the foot of our bed. But Cooper began keeping his distance, choosing to stay by my side instead. Dogs have an intuition about people that humans often lack, and I should have paid more attention to what Cooper was trying to tell me. The physical distance between Michael and me became more noticeable as the weeks passed. He would come to bed after I had already fallen asleep and leave for work before I woke up in the morning. Our weekend routines disappeared. Instead of spending Saturdays working on house projects together, Michael would claim that he needed to check on various job sites or meet with potential new clients. Sundays, which had always been our day to sleep in and make pancakes together, became lonely affairs where I would find myself eating breakfast alone while Michael was already gone, claiming he had forgotten about some urgent work matter. The intimacy between us vanished entirely. When I would try to initiate conversations about our future, about maybe starting a family or planning a vacation, Michael would deflect with comments about how busy work was and how we needed to focus on building up the business before we could think about other things. He stopped complimenting me, stopped noticing when I wore his favorite dress or tried a new hairstyle. I began to feel invisible in my own marriage, like I was living with a polite stranger who happened to share my last name and my mortgage payments. My best friend Jennifer noticed the changes before I was ready to admit them to myself. During our weekly coffee dates at Grind Coffee House, she would ask pointed questions about how things were going at home. When I would deflect with generic answers about everything being fine, she would give me that look that best friends perfect over years of friendship. The one that says they can see right through your carefully constructed facade. Jennifer had been through her own divorce 3 years earlier, so she recognized the signs that I was desperately trying to ignore. She never pushed too hard, but she would make comments about how Michael seemed distracted when she saw us together, or how I seemed sadder than usual despite my protests that everything was wonderful. She even offered to set me up with her therapist, suggesting that sometimes talking to a professional could help clarify confusing feelings. I declined, insisting that my marriage was solid and that I was just going through a stressful period. At work. The first concrete evidence that something was seriously wrong came on a Thursday evening in March. Michael had called to say he would be working late again, something about a plumbing emergency at the Chen project. I decided to surprise him by bringing dinner to the job site, thinking that maybe a romantic gesture would help bridge the growing distance between us. I packed his favorite meal from our local Mexican restaurant and drove to the downtown address he had given me weeks earlier. When I arrived at Vanessa's building, I was surprised by how upscale it was. The sleek glass exterior and modern lobby were definitely expensive, making me wonder how a fitness instructor could afford such a prime location. I took the elevator to the 15th floor and knocked on the door of Unit 1507, expecting to find Michael surrounded by construction tools and renovation chaos. Instead, I found myself face to face with a petite Asian woman with perfect makeup and an outfit that definitely wasn't suitable for dealing with construction dust. Vanessa Chen was beautiful in the way that fitness influencers are beautiful, all smooth skin and toned muscles and carefully styled hair. She looked confused when she saw me standing in her doorway holding a bag of food. When I explained that I was looking for Michael, her expression shifted to something I couldn't quite identify. She told me that he had left about an hour earlier, but the way she said it felt rehearsed, like she had been preparing for this exact conversation. I looked past her into the condo, expecting to see evidence of the extensive renovation work that had been keeping my husband busy for months. Instead, I saw a pristine living space with no signs of construction anywhere. No tools, no dust, no partially completed projects. Just expensive furniture and workout equipment that looked like it had never been disturbed. Vanessa must have noticed my confusion because she quickly explained that they had finished the gym renovation weeks ago, but Michael had been helping her with some additional projects around the condo. She spoke in a bright, cheerful tone that felt forced and She kept glancing back into her apartment as if she was worried about something I might see. I thanked her for the information and left, but my mind was racing with questions that I wasn't ready to answer. That night, when Michael came home 3 hours later, I asked him about my visit to Vanessa's condo. He seemed surprised that I had gone there, and his explanation about why I hadn't seen any construction work felt convoluted and defensive. He claimed that they had cleaned up the job site earlier that day because Vanessa was having guests over, and that he had been working on planning future projects rather than doing physical labor. When I pressed for more details, he became irritated and accused me of not trusting him to manage his own business properly. The argument that followed was unlike any we had ever had in our 8 years together. Michael raised his voice, something he rarely did, and accused me of being paranoid and controlling. He said that his work required him to maintain good relationships with his clients, and that my unexpected visit had been embarrassing and unprofessional. I found myself apologizing, even though I couldn't shake the feeling that his anger was disproportionate to what I had done. He stormed off to his home office and slammed the door, leaving me standing alone in our kitchen, wondering when our marriage had become so fragile. Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention to Michael's behavior patterns. I noticed that he would receive text messages at odd hours and would always step into another room to read them. His phone, which used to sit casually on the kitchen counter while he cooked dinner, was now constantly in his pocket or turned face down when he set it anywhere. He started taking calls in his truck in the driveway, claiming they were work-related, conversations that he didn't want to disturb me with. The emotional distance between us became a chasm that I didn't know how to bridge. I tried planning date nights, but Michael would cancel at the last minute due to work emergencies. I suggested we take a weekend trip together, but he insisted that he couldn't afford to take time away from the business during such a busy period. When I brought up the idea of couples counseling, he laughed and said that we didn't need to pay someone to tell us how to fix problems that didn't really exist. My work performance began to suffer as I found myself distracted and emotionally drained. My colleagues started commenting on how tired I looked, and my boss expressed concern about my recent lack of focus during important client presentations. I was struggling to maintain the professional facade that had always come naturally to me, but I couldn't stop thinking about the growing list of inconsistencies in Michael's stories about his work schedule and his client relationships. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in early April. I had been planning to sleep in, but Cooper's barking woke me up around 8 o'clock. Michael's side of the bed was empty, which wasn't unusual anymore, but Cooper seemed particularly agitated about something happening outside. I got up to investigate and found Cooper standing at the front window, his tail rigid and his attention focused on something in our driveway. When I looked outside, I saw Michael's truck parked behind, a sleek red BMW that I didn't recognize. As I watched, Michael emerged from the house carrying 2 coffee mugs and walked over to the BMW. The driver's side door opened, and Vanessa Chen stepped out. She was wearing yoga pants and a sports bra, her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and she looked completely comfortable in my driveway at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I watched in stunned silence as Michael handed her one of the coffee mugs and they stood talking by her car. Their body language was intimate in a way that made my stomach drop. They stood closer together than business associates would, and when Vanessa laughed at something Michael said, she placed her hand on his arm in a gesture that was unmistakably familiar. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They weren't conducting a business meeting in my driveway. They were behaving like a couple who were completely comfortable with each other. When Michael leaned down to kiss her goodbye, a quick peck that was casual and routine, I felt the foundation of my marriage crumble beneath my feet. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a recent mistake. This was clearly an established relationship with its own rhythms and patterns. They were acting like people who had been together for months, not like a contractor and his client who were conducting a professional relationship. I stood at my bedroom window watching my husband of 8 years kiss another woman in the driveway of the home we had built together, and I realized that I had been living in a carefully constructed lie for longer than I wanted to calculate. Michael hadn't been working late or dealing with demanding clients. He had been building a relationship with Vanessa while maintaining the pretense of our marriage, and I had been too trusting and too naive to see what was happening right in front of me. After Vanessa drove away, Michael came back into the house, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. He greeted me with his typical Saturday morning casualness, asking if I wanted him to make pancakes and commenting on how beautiful the weather was looking for the weekend. His ability to switch between his two different lives so seamlessly was almost more disturbing than the affair itself. I realized that I was living with someone who could lie to my face every single day without showing any signs of guilt or remorse. I didn't confront him that morning. Instead, I told him I wasn't feeling well and spent the day in bed, claiming I was coming down with something. Michael seemed relieved that I wanted to rest, and he spent the day working in his home office, while I lay upstairs trying to process what I had witnessed and figure out what I was going to do about it. My entire understanding of my marriage and my future had been shattered in the span of a few minutes, and I needed time to think clearly before I decided how to respond. That night, as Michael slept peacefully beside me, apparently unburdened by any guilt about his double life, I stared at the ceiling and began planning my next steps. I wasn't going to confront him based on what I had seen until I had a complete understanding of what I was dealing with. If Michael could lie to me so easily about something this significant, I needed to know what other deceptions might be lurking beneath the surface of our supposedly happy marriage. The woman who had trusted her husband implicitly for 8 years was gone. In her place was someone who was prepared to do whatever it took to uncover the truth about the man she had married and the life they had built together. I didn't know yet exactly what that would involve, but I knew that I was done, being the naive wife who believed every excuse and trusted every explanation. As I listened to Michael's steady breathing beside me, I began to understand that this wasn't just about an affair. This was about respect, honesty, and the fundamental question of whether our entire marriage had been built on lies. I was about to find out just how deep those lies went, and I was going to make sure that when the truth finally came to light, I would be the one in control of what happened next. The following Monday morning arrived with an uncomfortable normalcy that felt almost surreal after what I had witnessed over the weekend. Michael kissed my forehead goodbye before leaving for work, the same casual gesture he had performed thousands of times during our marriage. Yet now it felt like a performance designed to maintain his carefully constructed facade. I watched him drive away in his truck, wondering if he was heading to an actual job site or planning to spend the day with Vanessa, and I realized that I could no longer distinguish between his truths and his lies. I called in sick to work that day, something I rarely did, but I needed time to think and plan my next moves without the distraction of meetings and deadlines. After 8 years of marriage, I had accumulated enough sick days to take care of what had suddenly become the most important project of my life: uncovering the full extent of my husband's deception. My first stop was Jennifer's apartment. She lived in a trendy complex near downtown Austin, and when I showed up at her door unannounced at 9 in the morning, she took one look at my face and immediately invited me in. Jennifer had always been intuitive about people's emotional states, a skill that had served her well during her own divorce proceedings, and she didn't need me to explain why I looked like I hadn't slept. Over coffee in her bright kitchen, I told her everything. I described the months of late nights and mysterious phone calls, the uncomfortable feeling I had gotten at Vanessa's condo, and finally, the devastating scene I had witnessed in my own driveway. Jennifer listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, and when I finished talking, she was quiet for a long moment before responding. Jennifer's advice was practical and strategic, in a way that I wasn't emotionally prepared to be on my own. She suggested that I needed to gather concrete evidence before confronting Michael, because cheating spouses often became skilled at gaslighting their partners and making them question their own perceptions. She had learned this lesson during her own marriage when her ex-husband had convinced her that she was being paranoid and jealous, even when she had legitimate reasons to be suspicious. She also recommended that I start protecting myself financially, which was advice I hadn't even considered in my emotional state. Jennifer pointed out that I didn't know how long the affair had been going on, or whether Michael was spending marital assets on his relationship with Vanessa. She suggested that I start documenting our financial situation and consider opening my own bank account if I didn't already have one that was solely in my name. Most importantly, Jennifer urged me to contact a divorce attorney as soon as possible, not necessarily to file for divorce immediately, but to understand my rights and options. She gave me the name of Catherine Wells, the lawyer who had handled her own divorce, and suggested that I at least schedule a consultation to understand what I might be facing if my marriage couldn't be saved. The idea of calling a divorce attorney felt like admitting defeat before I had even attempted to salvage my marriage. But Jennifer's logic was sound. If Michael was capable of carrying on an affair for months while maintaining the appearance of a loving husband, I needed to be prepared for the possibility that our marriage was beyond repair. I also needed to understand what divorce would mean for our shared assets, including the house that we had worked so hard to make into our dream home. After leaving Jennifer's apartment, I drove to a coffee shop across town where I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew and spent several hours researching private investigators online. The idea of hiring someone to spy on my own husband felt both necessary and deeply sad. But I knew that I needed professional help to uncover the full scope of what I was dealing with. James Rodriguez had excellent reviews and specialized in marital investigations. His website was professional, but not flashy, and his approach seemed methodical rather than sensational. When I called his office that afternoon, his receptionist was able to schedule me for a consultation the following day, and I found myself relieved that I was finally taking concrete steps to understand my situation rather than simply worrying and wondering. That evening, Michael came home at his usual time, and we went through the motions of our normal dinner routine. He told me about his day, mentioning meetings with potential clients and problems with suppliers, and I found myself analyzing every word for signs of deception. The casual way he could sit across from me at our kitchen table and maintain normal conversation while living a double life was both impressive and terrifying. When Michael's phone buzzed during dinner, he glanced at it quickly and then set it face down on the table without responding. This was a change from his recent pattern of immediately checking every message, and I wondered if he was being more careful about his communication with Vanessa when I was around. The thought that he was adjusting his behavior to hide his affair more effectively was somehow more hurtful than the affair itself. After dinner, as Michael settled into his home office to work on what he claimed were project estimates, I took Cooper for a longer walk than usual around our neighborhood. The familiar streets and houses that had always represented stability and success now felt like a stage set for a life that was falling apart. I wondered how many of our neighbors suspected that something was wrong, or if Michael and I were still successfully projecting the image of a happy couple to the outside world. During our walk, I called Catherine Wells and left a voicemail requesting a consultation. The lawyer's answering service was professional and discreet, and I was grateful that I didn't have to explain my situation to a stranger over the phone. Simply making the call felt like crossing a line from which there might be no return, but I knew that I needed professional guidance to navigate whatever came next. The next morning, I met with James Rodriguez at his office in a modest building near the courthouse. He was a middle-aged Hispanic man with kind eyes and a straightforward manner that put me at ease despite the uncomfortable nature of our meeting. James explained that marital investigations typically involved surveillance, financial research, and digital forensics, depending on what the client needed to prove. When I described my situation, James nodded with the familiarity of someone who had heard similar stories many times before. He explained that he could provide surveillance services to document Michael's activities and relationship with Vanessa, but he also suggested that I might want to conduct some preliminary research on my own before investing in professional services. James taught me how to check our phone records online, how to monitor our credit card statements for unusual charges, and how to look for changes in Michael's computer and phone usage patterns. He also gave me practical advice about protecting myself financially and legally, echoing many of the suggestions that Jennifer had made the day before. The consultation fee was reasonable, and James's approach was methodical rather than dramatic. He wasn't trying to sell me services I didn't need, and he emphasized that my goal should be to gather enough information to make informed decisions about my marriage, rather than simply to catch Michael in compromising situations. This professional perspective helped me feel more confident about my decision to investigate rather than simply confronting Michael based on what I had already witnessed. That afternoon, I had my consultation with Catherine Wells at her law office, downtown. The building was elegant and professional, with a lobby that projected both success and discretion. Catherine's office was spacious and comfortable, with diplomas and awards that testified to her experience in family law. Catherine was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a direct manner that inspired confidence. She had clearly handled many cases involving marital infidelity, and she was able to explain Texas divorce law in terms that I could understand. Most importantly, she assured me that scheduling a consultation didn't commit me to filing for divorce. But that understanding, my legal rights, was always advisable when dealing with marital problems. The information Catherine provided was both reassuring and sobering. Texas is a community property state, which meant that assets acquired during our marriage would generally be divided equally in a divorce. However, she explained that if Michael had been spending marital funds on his affair, I might be entitled to reimbursement for those expenditures. She also discussed spousal support, child custody considerations if we had children in the future, and the timeline for divorce proceedings. Catherine recommended that I start documenting everything related to Michael's affair and our financial situation. She suggested that I gather bank statements, credit card records, tax returns, and any other financial documents that might be relevant if we ultimately proceeded with divorce. She also advised me to start keeping a detailed journal of Michael's behavior patterns and any evidence of his relationship with Vanessa. Most importantly, Catherine urged me to avoid confronting Michael about the affair until I had gathered sufficient evidence and had a clear plan for how I wanted to proceed. She explained that premature confrontation often resulted in cheating spouses becoming more careful about hiding their activities, which could make it more difficult to gather evidence later if needed for divorce proceedings. The legal consultation was emotionally exhausting, but it provided me with a framework for understanding my options and protecting my interests. Catherine gave me a folder with information about Texas divorce law and a list of steps I should take to prepare myself financially and legally for whatever decisions I might need to make in the coming weeks. That evening, I began implementing the research strategies that James Rodriguez had taught me. I waited until Michael was in the shower before accessing our phone records online using the account information I found in his desk drawer. What I discovered was more devastating than I had expected. The phone records showed hundreds of text messages and calls between Michael and Vanessa's number over the past 4 months. The communication patterns revealed that they were in contact throughout every day, often late at night and early in the morning. The frequency and timing of their communication made it clear that this wasn't a casual affair or a recent development. This was an established relationship with its own daily rhythms and routines. Even more disturbing was the evidence that Michael had been lying about his work schedule for months. On days when he had told me he was working late at job sites, the phone records showed that he had spent hours on calls with Vanessa. On weekends, when he claimed to be meeting with potential clients, he had been exchanging dozens of text messages with her throughout the day. I also discovered that Michael had been communicating with Vanessa during times when he was supposedly focused on our marriage. On the evening when we had attempted to have a romantic dinner at home, he had sent her multiple text messages from our bathroom. During our last attempted date night, which he had ultimately canceled due to a work emergency, he had spent over an hour on the phone with her after telling me he was dealing with a client crisis. The financial records were equally revealing. Our credit card statements showed charges at expensive restaurants where Michael had apparently taken Vanessa for lunch dates, while telling me he was eating sandwiches at job sites. There were purchases at jewelry stores and lingerie shops that I had never seen evidence of at home. Most concerning were several large cash advances that I couldn't account for, suggesting that Michael had been spending money on his affair in ways that wouldn't leave obvious paper trails. I spent hours that night printing and organizing the evidence I had gathered, creating a file that documented the scope of Michael's deception. The process was methodical and numbing, allowing me to focus on practical tasks rather than the emotional implications of what I was discovering. By the time I finished, I had a comprehensive picture of an affair that had been going on for at least 4 months and had involved significant financial expenditures from our joint accounts. The most painful realization was that Michael had been living 2 completely separate lives with remarkable skill and consistency. While maintaining the appearance of a devoted husband at home, he had been building an entirely different relationship with Vanessa that included daily communication, regular dates, and expensive gifts. The level of planning and deception required to maintain both relationships simultaneously suggested that this wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake he regretted. This was a deliberate choice that he had been making every day for months. When Michael came to bed that night, I pretended to be asleep while he settled in beside me. The man lying next to me, who had shared my bed for 8 years and who still reached for my hand in his sleep, was essentially a stranger. I had been living with someone who could compartmentalize his life so effectively that he could kiss his mistress goodbye in our driveway and then come inside to make me pancakes without showing any signs of internal conflict. The next few days passed in a surreal blur of normal routine layered over my secret investigation. I went to work and attended meetings while mentally cataloging evidence of my husband's affair. I cooked dinner and made conversation while planning my next steps. For gathering information, I walked Cooper and tended our garden while researching divorce attorneys and financial planning strategies. Michael seemed oblivious to any change in my behavior, which was both helpful for my investigation and deeply hurtful on a personal level. If he had been paying attention to me with even a fraction of the focus he was directing toward Vanessa, he might have noticed that something was different. But his attention was clearly elsewhere, and I was becoming increasingly invisible in my own marriage. James Rodriguez called me that Friday to check on my progress and offer additional guidance. I reported what I had discovered through my own research, and he was impressed with the thoroughness of my documentation. He suggested that I was gathering sufficient evidence to support whatever decisions I might need to make about my marriage, but he also offered to provide surveillance services if I wanted additional confirmation of Michael's activities. The surveillance option was tempting, but I realized that I already had enough evidence to confirm what I had suspected. The question was no longer whether Michael was having an affair, but rather what I was going to do about it. I thanked James for his guidance and told him I would contact him again if I needed additional investigative services. That weekend brought a new development that changed everything I thought I understood about my situation. Michael announced on Friday evening that he would be spending Saturday helping David with a large project that required extra hands. This wasn't unusual, as the business partners often helped each other with demanding jobs, but something about Michael's explanation felt rehearsed in the same way that his other recent excuses had sounded. Saturday morning, I decided to drive past David's house to see if Michael's truck was actually there. David lived in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from ours, and I had been to his house many times for barbecues and business celebrations. When I drove by around 10 in the morning, there was no sign of Michael's truck, and David's wife was outside working in her garden, clearly not expecting company. Instead of confronting Michael about this latest lie, I decided to follow up on a suspicion that had been growing in my mind over the past week. I drove to Vanessa's building downtown and parked across the street where I could observe the entrance. without being conspicuous. I didn't have to wait long before I saw Michael's truck pull into the parking garage beneath her building. What happened next was so shocking that I initially thought I was misunderstanding what I was witnessing. Instead of leaving after a few hours, as I would have expected for a romantic rendezvous, Michael's truck remained in the parking garage all day. When I finally saw him emerge that evening around 6 o'clock, he was carrying a duffel bag and what appeared to be several days' worth of clothes. The implications of what I had observed were staggering. This wasn't just an affair conducted during stolen hours between work obligations. Michael was spending entire days and potentially nights at Vanessa's condo, essentially living a second life that was completely separate from our marriage. The duffel bag suggested that he was keeping clothes and personal items at her place, which meant their relationship had progressed far beyond casual meetings and romantic dinners. I sat in my car across from Vanessa's building for almost an hour after Michael left, trying to process what this meant for my marriage and my future. The man I had been married to for 8 years wasn't just cheating on me. He was actively choosing to spend his time building a life with another woman while maintaining our marriage as what appeared to be an increasingly meaningless facade. When Michael came home that evening, he greeted me with his usual casualness and launched into a detailed story about the challenging project he had supposedly been working on with David. He described problems with electrical systems and delays, with material deliveries, creating an elaborate fiction that demonstrated just how comfortable he had become with lying to me about fundamental aspects of his daily life. I listened to his fabricated account of the day while knowing exactly where he had actually spent those hours, and I realized that our marriage had become nothing more than a performance that Michael was staging for reasons I couldn't understand. If he was essentially living with Vanessa, why was he maintaining the pretense of our relationship? Was he trying to avoid the financial and legal complications of divorce, or was he simply enjoying the convenience of having two separate lives? That night, as I lay in bed listening to Michael sleep peacefully beside me, I knew that I had reached a decision point. I had gathered enough evidence to understand the scope of his deception, and I had educated myself about my legal and financial options. The question was no longer what Michael was doing or how long he had been doing it. The question was what I was going to do about it, and when. The woman who had trusted her husband completely just 2 weeks earlier was gone. In her place was someone who understood that her marriage was built on lies, and that her husband was capable of deceptions that went far beyond anything she had imagined possible. I was no longer interested in trying to save a relationship with someone who could lie to me so effortlessly about such fundamental aspects of his life. But I also wasn't ready to simply confront Michael and demand explanations that would likely just result in more elaborate lies. If he could maintain such an extensive deception for months, he was certainly capable of creating new lies to explain away whatever evidence I presented. I needed a strategy that would give me control over the situation, rather than allowing him to continue manipulating me with false explanations and empty promises. As I began planning my next moves, I realized that I had one significant advantage that Michael didn't know about. While he had been focused on maintaining his double life, I had been learning about his secrets and preparing myself for whatever came next. He thought he was controlling the situation by keeping me in the dark, but I was about to show him that the woman he had been deceiving was far more capable than he had ever imagined. My opportunity came 3 weeks later in a way I never could have anticipated. Michael announced on Thursday evening that he would be attending a construction industry conference in Houston over the weekend. The conference was legitimate. I had seen the registration materials on his desk, but his eagerness to attend seemed disproportionate for an event that would normally be David's responsibility as the business development partner. When I casually asked if I could join him for the weekend, perhaps making it a romantic getaway, Michael's reaction was immediate and telling. He quickly explained that the conference would be all business meetings and networking events, hardly romantic, and that he would be sharing a hotel room with David to save money. His tone was apologetic but firm, and he seemed relieved when I accepted his explanation without pressing for details. That Friday morning, I watched Michael pack his overnight bag with more care than he usually took for actual business trips. He included cologne, his expensive watch, and clothes that were more suitable for dinner dates than industry presentations. As he kissed me goodbye, promising to call that evening, I knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't be spending the weekend at any conference. After Michael left, I put the first phase of my plan into action. I called Vanessa's fitness studio, using a fake name to inquire about personal training sessions. The receptionist cheerfully informed me that Vanessa wasn't available for new clients over the weekend because she was taking a short vacation. When I pressed for details about when she might be available the following week, the receptionist mentioned that Vanessa was going out of town with her boyfriend for a romantic weekend getaway. The confirmation that Michael and Vanessa were traveling together, while he had lied to me about attending a business conference, was exactly what I needed to move forward with my plan. I had spent weeks gathering evidence and preparing for this moment, and now I had the perfect opportunity to confront them both in a situation where they couldn't easily escape or deflect with more lies. I drove to Houston that afternoon using the GPS tracking app I had discreetly installed on Michael's phone weeks earlier. The signal led me to the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. Definitely not the budget accommodation Michael would have chosen if he were actually sharing a room with David to save money. I parked across the street and waited, feeling remarkably calm despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. Around 6 o'clock, I spotted Michael and Vanessa entering the hotel lobby together. They were dressed elegantly for dinner, walking, hand in hand like any other couple enjoying a romantic weekend. Vanessa was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and Michael was in the navy suit I had given him for our last anniversary. Seeing him wear my gift while on a romantic getaway with his mistress felt like a deliberate insult, though I knew he probably hadn't considered the irony. I waited until they entered the elevator before following them into the hotel. The lobby was busy with weekend guests and conference attendees, providing perfect cover for my presence. I approached the concierge desk and explained that I was supposed to meet my husband, Michael Chen, but that I had forgotten his room number. The young man behind the desk was helpful and discreet, providing me with the information I needed without asking uncomfortable questions. Room 1247 was on the 12th floor, and I took the elevator up with a group of business people who were clearly attending an actual conference. Their casual conversation about industry trends and networking events reminded me of the lie Michael had told me to explain his presence in Houston. The contrast between their legitimate business purpose and Michael's deception made my resolve even stronger. I stood outside room 1247 for several minutes, listening to the muffled sounds of conversation and laughter from inside. Michael and Vanessa were clearly comfortable and relaxed, probably discussing their dinner plans or enjoying wine from the hotel's room service. The normalcy of their voices, the way they sounded like any couple on a romantic weekend, was somehow more disturbing than if I had heard evidence of passionate romance. When I finally knocked on the door, the conversation inside stopped immediately. I heard Michael's voice asking who it was, and I could detect the wariness in his tone even through the closed door. I announced myself clearly, and the silence that followed was so complete that I wondered if they were both holding their breath. Michael opened the door wearing a hotel bathrobe, his hair damp from a recent shower. His expression went through several rapid changes: surprise, confusion, fear, and then a desperate attempt to regain composure. Behind him, I could see Vanessa sitting on the edge of the bed in a silk robe, her perfect composure clearly shattered by my unexpected appearance. Michael's first instinct was to step into the hallway and close the door behind him, but I pushed past him into the room before he could react. The suite was elegant and expensive, with champagne chilling in an ice, bucket and rose petals scattered across the bed. Room service dishes suggested they had been enjoying an intimate dinner, and Vanessa's clothes were draped over a chair in a way that suggested they had been planning to spend the evening in various states of undress. The scene was exactly what I had expected, but seeing it in person was still emotionally devastating. This wasn't a cheap motel room where guilty secrets were hidden in shame. This was a romantic retreat where my husband and his mistress were building memories and celebrating their relationship with the same kind of thoughtful touches that Michael had once used to surprise me. Michael immediately launched into an explanation that was so elaborate and desperate that it was almost comical. He claimed that Vanessa was going through a difficult breakup and had needed emotional support, that they had run into each other at the hotel bar and she had been too upset to be alone, that he was just being a good friend during a crisis. The lies came so quickly and with such practiced ease that I realized he had probably been preparing explanations for this exact scenario. Vanessa, to her credit, didn't attempt to support Michael's fictional narrative. She sat quietly on the bed, clutching her robe closed and watching our interaction with the wary attention of someone who understood that her comfortable situation was about to become very complicated. Her silence was more honest than Michael's frantic explanations, and I found myself almost respecting her for not participating in his desperate performance. I let Michael talk for several minutes, not interrupting his increasingly convoluted story about coincidence and friendship and emotional support. When he finally ran out of explanations, I calmly reached into my purse and withdrew the folder of evidence I had been compiling for weeks. The phone records, credit card statements, photographs, and financial documentation were organized in clear plastic sleeves, creating a comprehensive record of their 4-month affair. The change in Michael's expression when he saw the folder was immediate and complete. All of his desperate energy drained away, replaced by the pale resignation of someone who had just realized that their carefully constructed lies had been exposed. He sank into a chair by the window, no longer making eye contact with me, while Vanessa remained frozen on the bed. I began reading selected items from the phone records, documenting the hundreds of calls and text messages they had exchanged over the past 4 months. I showed them printouts of credit card charges for restaurants, hotels, jewelry, and gifts that I had never received. I presented photographs I had taken of Michael's truck at Vanessa's building on days when he had supposedly been working at construction sites across town. Most devastating was the financial analysis I had prepared with Catherine Wells's guidance. The spreadsheet showed that Michael had spent over $15,000 of our joint savings on his relationship with Vanessa. The money had been withdrawn through cash advances, expensive dinners, weekend trips, and purchases at jewelry stores and boutique shops. He had essentially been using our marriage as a financial resource to fund his affair. Vanessa spoke for the first time when I mentioned the financial details. She seemed genuinely surprised by the amount of money Michael had been spending, and she asked him directly whether he had been using joint accounts to pay for their relationship expenses. Her question suggested that she had assumed he was independently wealthy rather than understanding that he was stealing from our marriage to impress her. Michael's response to Vanessa's question was perhaps the most honest thing he had said all evening. He admitted that the construction business wasn't as profitable as he had led her to believe, and that he had been supplementing his income with money from our joint accounts to maintain the lifestyle he thought she expected. His confession revealed not only the financial deception he had been practicing against me, but also the lies he had been telling Vanessa about his financial situation. The realization that Michael had been deceiving both of us seemed to shift the dynamic in the room. Vanessa began asking pointed questions about his marriage, his finances, and his long-term intentions that he clearly wasn't prepared to answer. She wanted to know whether he had been planning to divorce me, whether he could actually afford the expensive gifts he had been giving her, and whether their entire relationship had been built on lies about his circumstances. Michael's answers were evasive and contradictory, revealing that he hadn't actually planned beyond maintaining both relationships indefinitely. He had been living day to day, enjoying the excitement of his double life without considering the practical or emotional consequences for anyone involved. His lack of a coherent plan for the future seemed to disappoint Vanessa, as much as his financial deceptions had surprised her. I watched this exchange with fascination, realizing that Michael had been manipulating Vanessa almost as extensively as he had been deceiving me. She had believed she was in a relationship with a successful businessman who was planning to leave his wife for her, when in reality, she was involved with a man who was stealing from his marriage to fund their affair, while having no actual intention of ending his marriage. When Vanessa asked me directly how long I had known about their affair, I explained my investigation process and timeline. I described discovering the phone records, following the financial trail, and conducting surveillance that had revealed the extent of their relationship. My calm, methodical explanation seemed to impress her and disturb Michael, who was clearly unprepared for the possibility that I had been gathering evidence for weeks. Vanessa's next question caught both Michael and me off guard. She asked whether I was planning to divorce him, and when I confirmed that I had already consulted with an attorney, she wanted to know what that would mean for Michael's financial situation. Her practical focus on the economic implications of divorce suggested that she was rapidly reevaluating her relationship with a man who might not be able to maintain the lifestyle he had been providing. I explained Texas community property law and the likely division of our assets, including the house, the business, and our savings accounts. I also mentioned that Michael might be required to reimburse me for the marital funds he had spent on his affair, which could significantly impact his financial position after divorce. Catherine Wells had prepared me for these discussions, and I was able to provide specific numbers and projections. Michael listened to this financial analysis with growing panic, clearly understanding for the first time that his affair was going to have serious economic consequences, regardless of what happened to either of his relationships. The construction business was barely profitable enough to support one household, let alone two, and the prospect of dividing assets and paying spousal support would leave him in a precarious financial position. Vanessa's reaction to this financial reality was swift and decisive. She announced that she needed time to think about their relationship and whether it was based on a foundation of honesty that could support a future together. Her tone was polite, but firm, and it was clear that she was ending their romantic weekend immediately. She asked Michael to leave so that she could pack and return to Austin alone. Michael's desperation became pathetic as he realized that both of his relationships were collapsing simultaneously. He alternated between pleading with me to forgive him and begging Vanessa not to abandon him, creating a scene that was both emotionally exhausting and deeply satisfying. The man who had been so confident in his ability to manage two separate lives was now facing the consequences of his deceptions, and he had no idea how to salvage either relationship. I told Michael that I would be spending the night at the hotel and that he should return to Austin immediately. I informed him that I would be moving out of our house when I returned the following day, and that he should expect to receive divorce papers within the week. I also mentioned that I had already opened my own bank account and transferred my portion of our joint savings, protecting myself from any additional financial surprises. Vanessa supported my decision by confirming that she was ending her relationship with Michael and would not be seeing him again. She apologized to me for her role in destroying my marriage, though she pointed out that she had been misled about Michael's intentions and financial situation. Her apology seemed genuine, and I found myself feeling more sympathy for her than anger, since we had both been victims of Michael's elaborate deceptions. Michael's final attempt to salvage the situation was a desperate promise to end his relationship with Vanessa and focus entirely on rebuilding our marriage. He swore that the affair had been a mistake, that he loved me and wanted to spend the rest of his life making up for his betrayal. His pleading was emotional and dramatic, but it felt like another performance designed to manipulate me into giving him what he wanted. I looked at the man I had been married to for 8 years, who was now kneeling on the floor of a hotel room begging me not to divorce him while his mistress packed her clothes 10 feet away, and I felt nothing but contempt for his weakness and dishonesty. The Michael I had fallen in love with had either never existed or had been slowly replaced by someone capable of elaborate deceptions and financial theft. My response was calm and final. I told Michael that his apologies were meaningless because, They were motivated by consequences rather than genuine remorse. I explained that his willingness to steal from our marriage to fund his affair had destroyed any possibility of trust between us. Most importantly, I informed him that I had already made my decision about our marriage, and that nothing he could say or promise would change my mind. As I walked out of room 1247, leaving Michael and Vanessa to deal with the wreckage of their relationship on their own, I felt lighter than I had in months. The confrontation had been emotionally difficult, but it had also been empowering in a way I hadn't expected. I had been in complete control of the situation, armed with facts and evidence rather than emotions and accusations. The elevator ride down to the lobby gave me time to process what had just happened. In the span of 30 minutes, I had ended my 8-year marriage and exposed the lies that had been poisoning my life for months. Michael's affair was over, his financial deceptions were revealed, and his comfortable double life was destroyed. More importantly, I had proven to myself that I was capable of taking decisive action to protect my own interests. I spent that night in a different hotel, treating myself to room service and a bottle of wine, while I called Catherine Wells to report that I was ready to proceed with divorce proceedings. The lawyer was impressed with the evidence I had gathered, and confident that we could achieve a favorable settlement given Michael's financial misconduct during the marriage. The next morning, I drove back to Austin feeling like a completely different person than the woman who had discovered her husband's affair just a few weeks earlier. The scared, confused wife, who had been desperately trying to understand what was happening to her marriage, was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and was prepared to fight for the life she deserved. When I returned to Austin on Sunday afternoon, I expected to find our house empty, giving me time to pack my belongings and arrange for a moving truck. Instead, I discovered Michael's car in the driveway and could hear voices coming from inside. As I approached the front door, I realized that one of those voices belonged to Vanessa, and my blood pressure spiked as I understood what was happening. Michael had apparently convinced Vanessa to come to our house, despite her declaration that their relationship was over. Through the front window, I could see them sitting together on the couch in our living room, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Vanessa had changed from the designer clothes she wore in Houston into casual jeans and a sweater, and she looked completely at home in the space I had spent years decorating and maintaining. I stood in my own driveway for several minutes, trying to process the audacity of what I was witnessing. After everything that had happened in Houston, after Vanessa had supposedly ended their relationship and I had made it clear that I was filing for divorce, Michael had brought his mistress into our marital home. The violation felt even more personal than discovering their affair, because this was my sanctuary being invaded by the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. When I finally entered the house using my key, both Michael and Vanessa looked up with expressions that ranged from guilt to defiance. Michael immediately stood up and began explaining that Vanessa had come to talk about ending their relationship properly and returning some gifts he had given her. Vanessa remained seated but looked uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact, while Michael continued his latest round of desperate explanations. The gifts Michael mentioned were displayed on our coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. There was an expensive necklace I had never seen, a designer handbag that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment, and several smaller jewelry boxes that contained earrings and bracelets. The total value of the items was staggering, representing thousands of dollars that Michael had spent from our joint accounts while I was clipping coupons and looking for ways to save money on our household expenses. Vanessa spoke quietly, explaining that she had decided to return everything Michael had given her because she didn't feel comfortable keeping gifts that had been purchased with money that belonged to both of us. Her gesture seemed noble on the surface, but I realized that she was also protecting herself from potential legal complications if I decided to pursue reimbursement for the marital funds Michael had spent on their affair. Michael's reaction to Vanessa's decision was a mixture of panic and anger that revealed just how invested he had become in maintaining both relationships simultaneously. He insisted that the gifts were hers to keep, that he had given them freely, and wanted her to have them regardless of what happened between them. His desperation to maintain some connection with her was pathetic and transparent, and I could see that Vanessa was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with his emotional intensity. What happened next shocked me more than anything I had discovered about their affair. Michael turned to me and suggested that the three of us sit down together to discuss how we could all move forward in a way that minimized hurt feelings and legal complications. He proposed that we could work out some kind of arrangement that would allow him to maintain relationships with both of us, perhaps with me keeping the house, and Vanessa becoming his primary romantic partner. The suggestion was so absurd and offensive that I initially thought Michael was having some kind of mental breakdown. He seemed genuinely convinced that he could negotiate a solution that would allow him to continue his double life with our explicit consent and cooperation. His proposal revealed a level of narcissism and entitlement that I had never recognized during our marriage, and I realized that I had been living with someone whose selfishness was so profound that he couldn't understand why his infidelity was unacceptable. Vanessa's reaction to Michael's proposal was swift and decisive. She stood up immediately and told him that his suggestion was inappropriate and impossible, and that she had no interest in being part of any arrangement that involved sharing him with his wife. Her response seemed to surprise Michael, who had apparently convinced himself that both women in his life would be willing to accept a permanent triangular relationship if he presented it as a mature, modern solution to his romantic complications. I used Vanessa's rejection of Michael's proposal as an opportunity to take control of the conversation and make my own position crystal clear. I informed them both that I had already filed the preliminary paperwork for divorce that morning, using the evidence I had gathered to support claims of adultery and financial misconduct. I explained that my attorney was confident we could prove that Michael had spent significant marital assets on his affair, which would impact the property division and spousal support calculations. The legal reality of divorce proceedings seemed to shock Michael in a way that our confrontation in Houston had not. He had apparently convinced himself that his apologies and promises would be sufficient to avoid serious consequences, but the mention of court filings and financial penalties made him understand that his actions were going to have lasting legal and economic implications. Vanessa asked specific questions about the divorce timeline and whether she might be called as a witness in any proceedings. I explained that Texas divorce law allowed for testimony about adultery, and that the financial evidence of their affair would likely require her to provide depositions about gifts and expenses that Michael had claimed as business deductions. Her face went pale as she realized that their private relationship was going to become part of a public legal record. Michael's desperation reached new heights as he understood that both women were abandoning him and that he was facing serious financial consequences for his deceptions. He began making increasingly dramatic promises about changing his behavior, attending counseling, and dedicating himself entirely to rebuilding our marriage. His pleading was emotional and exhausting, and I could see that Vanessa was becoming embarrassed by his lack of dignity. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door, which surprised all three of us since we weren't expecting anyone. When I answered the door, I found David, Michael's business partner, standing on our porch with a concerned expression. He explained that he had been trying to reach Michael all weekend and was worried when Michael hadn't responded to calls about an urgent client situation. David's presence created an awkward moment as he clearly sensed the tension in the room, but didn't understand what was happening. Michael quickly introduced Vanessa as a client who was discussing some final details about her renovation project, but David's expression suggested that he wasn't entirely convinced by this explanation. The introduction was particularly uncomfortable because David had met me many times over the years and knew that client meetings weren't typically held in our living room on Sunday afternoons. I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I invited David to stay and explained the real reason for Vanessa's presence in our home. I told him about Michael's affair, the financial deceptions, and the divorce proceedings that were already underway. My revelation was calm and factual. focusing on the business implications of Michael's actions rather than the emotional aspects of his betrayal. David's reaction was a mixture of shock, disappointment, and immediate concern about the impact on their construction company. He asked pointed questions about how much money Michael had taken from our joint accounts and whether any business funds had been used for personal expenses. His focus on the financial details made it clear that he understood the serious implications for their partnership and their professional reputation. Michael tried to minimize the business impact by insisting that he had only used personal funds for his relationship with Vanessa, but David wasn't satisfied with these assurances. He demanded to see the company's financial records and credit card statements, and he made it clear that he would be conducting his own audit to ensure that business assets hadn't been compromised by Michael's personal conduct. Vanessa used the arrival of David and the focus on business concerns as an opportunity to leave. She gathered the returned gifts from the coffee table and announced that she was going home and didn't want any further contact with Michael. Her departure was final and decisive, and she ignored Michael's attempts to follow her to the door for a private conversation. After Vanessa left, David confronted Michael directly about the implications of his affair for their business partnership. He pointed out that their construction company depended on trust and reputation in a competitive market, and that a messy divorce involving financial misconduct could damage their professional relationships with clients and suppliers. David also expressed concern about whether Michael would be able to focus on work responsibilities while dealing with divorce proceedings and financial difficulties. Michael's responses to David's concerns were evasive and defensive, suggesting that he hadn't considered how his personal problems would affect their business relationship. He insisted that he could keep his personal life separate from work responsibilities, but his track record of deception and poor judgment had clearly undermined David's confidence in his reliability as a partner. The conversation between Michael and David gave me an opportunity to observe my husband's character from a new perspective. David had been Michael's friend and business partner for years, and his disappointment was genuine and profound. Watching Michael deflect responsibility and minimize the consequences of his actions with someone who had trusted and supported him professionally was revealing and disturbing. David eventually announced that he needed time to evaluate the partnership and consider his options for protecting the business from the fallout of Michael's personal problems. He suggested that they should meet with their attorney and accountant to review the partnership agreement and discuss potential restructuring that would shield the company from any legal or financial complications arising from Michael's divorce. After David left, Michael and I were alone in our house for the first time since I had discovered his affair. The silence was heavy and uncomfortable, filled with the weight of 8 years of marriage that was ending in betrayal and legal proceedings. Michael looked defeated and exhausted, finally understanding that his comfortable double life was completely destroyed and that he was facing serious consequences for his deceptions. Michael made one final attempt to convince me to reconsider the divorce, promising that he would do whatever it took to rebuild trust and repair our marriage. He offered to attend counseling, cut off all contact with Vanessa, and submit to complete financial transparency to prove his commitment to change. His promises were detailed and specific, suggesting that he had been thinking about what he would need to do to convince me to give him another chance. My response was calm but final. I explained that trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be repaired through promises and good intentions. I told him that his willingness to steal from our marriage to fund his affair had revealed a fundamental character flaw that I couldn't overlook or forgive. Most importantly, I made it clear that I had already emotionally detached from our marriage and was looking forward to building a new life without him. Michael's reaction to my definitive rejection was a mixture of anger and self-pity that confirmed my decision to end our marriage. He accused me of being unforgiving and vindictive, suggesting that I was overreacting to what he characterized as a temporary mistake that didn't reflect his true feelings for me. His inability to understand the severity of his betrayal and the depth of the damage he had caused demonstrated that he was incapable of the genuine remorse and personal growth that would be necessary for any reconciliation. I spent the rest of that Sunday packing my personal belongings while Michael remained in his home office, presumably trying to salvage his business relationship with David and prepare for the legal proceedings that were about to begin. The process of selecting what to take from our shared life was emotionally challenging, but it was also liberating to focus on practical decisions rather than dwelling on the pain of betrayal. Cooper seemed to sense that something significant was changing, and he followed me from room to room as I packed boxes and suitcases. The decision about what to do with our dog was one of the most difficult aspects of the separation, but I ultimately decided that Cooper would be better off staying with me since Michael's living situation was likely to be unstable for the foreseeable future. That evening, I loaded my car with the essentials and drove to a furnished apartment I had rented near downtown Austin. The temporary housing was small and impersonal compared to the house I was leaving behind, but it represented freedom and a fresh start that felt more valuable than any material possessions I was giving up. My first night in the apartment was strange and lonely, but it was also peaceful in a way that our house hadn't been for months. I didn't have to wonder where Michael was or what lies he might be telling me about his activities. I didn't have to pretend that everything was fine when every interaction felt forced and artificial. For the first time in months, I could simply be honest about my situation and focus on planning my future, rather than trying to save a marriage that had been destroyed by deception. Catherine Wells called that evening to discuss the next steps in the divorce proceedings and to review the additional evidence I had gathered during the confrontation in Houston. She was pleased with the documentation I had compiled and confident that we could achieve a favorable settlement, given the clear evidence of Michael's financial misconduct and adultery. The legal process was going to be complex and potentially contentious, but I felt prepared and supported by professionals who understood how to protect my interests. Catherine explained that we would be seeking reimbursement for the marital funds Michael had spent on his affair, a fair division of our remaining assets, and spousal support if warranted by the financial analysis of our respective earning capacities. As I fell asleep in my new apartment that night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. The woman who had been desperately trying to understand why her marriage felt so distant and disconnected was gone. In her place was someone who had taken decisive action to end a relationship built on lies and was preparing to fight for the financial security and emotional peace that she deserved. Michael had spent months believing that he could manage two relationships simultaneously without consequences, but his carefully constructed double life had collapsed in a matter of days once the truth was revealed. His affair was over, his business partnership was in jeopardy, and he was facing divorce proceedings that would have serious financial implications for his future. Most importantly, I had proven to myself that I was capable of surviving betrayal and taking control of my own destiny. The scared, confused woman who had discovered her husband's deception had transformed into someone who could gather evidence, confront lies, and make difficult decisions about her future. The hardest part of the journey was behind me, and I was ready to begin building a new life based on honesty, self-respect, and genuine happiness. The divorce proceedings moved forward with surprising efficiency over the following weeks. Catherine Wells had been right about the strength of our case. The evidence I had gathered was comprehensive enough that Michael's attorney quickly advised him to accept a settlement rather than fight the charges in court. The financial records, phone logs, and witness statements painted such a clear picture of his misconduct that any trial would have only resulted in greater public embarrassment and higher legal costs. Michael's business relationship with David deteriorated rapidly once the full scope of the financial deceptions became clear. The audit that David conducted revealed that Michael had indeed used company credit cards for several of his dates with Vanessa, claiming them as client entertainment expenses for tax purposes. The discovery that Michael had been committing tax fraud in addition to stealing from our marriage gave David the justification he needed to dissolve their partnership and buy out Michael's share of the business at a significantly reduced valuation. The dissolution of the construction company was particularly devastating for Michael, because it eliminated his primary source of income just as he was facing the financial obligations of divorce. Without the steady income from the business, he was unable to maintain the lifestyle he had been projecting to impress Vanessa, and his prospects for rebuilding his career were limited by the reputation damage caused by the circumstances of his departure from the partnership. Vanessa made good on her promise to cut all contact with Michael, and from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, she had quickly moved on to dating someone else. The fitness instructor apparently had no interest in supporting a man through the consequences of his poor decisions, especially when those consequences included financial instability and a damaged professional reputation. Her swift abandonment of Michael once his true circumstances were revealed demonstrated that their relationship had been built more on material benefits than genuine emotional connection. Michael's attempts to contact me during the divorce proceedings were persistent, but increasingly desperate. He sent lengthy emails explaining his regret and outlining detailed plans for how he would change his behavior if I would give him another chance. He left voicemails describing his loneliness and his newfound appreciation for what we had shared together. He even sent flowers to my office with notes promising that he would spend the rest of his life making up for his betrayal. All of these attempts at reconciliation had the opposite effect of what Michael intended. Rather than softening my resolve, his inability to accept my decision and move on with his life reinforced my conviction that ending our marriage had been the right choice. A man who could maintain such an elaborate deception for months and then refuse to respect my clearly stated boundaries was not someone I could trust to honor any promises about future behavior. The legal settlement we ultimately reached was more favorable than I had initially expected. Michael agreed to give me sole ownership of our house in exchange for assuming full responsibility for the mortgage and other debts. He also agreed to reimburse me for the $15,000 he had spent on his affair, to be paid in monthly installments over 3 years. Most importantly, he waived any claim to spousal support despite the fact that his income had been higher than mine. During our marriage, Catherine Wells explained that Michael's attorney had advised him to accept these terms because fighting them in court would have resulted in even greater financial penalties once a judge reviewed the evidence of his misconduct. The settlement also included a confidentiality clause that prevented either of us from discussing the details of our divorce publicly, which protected Michael's remaining professional prospects while ensuring that I wouldn't be subjected to his attempts to control the narrative about our marriage. The day our divorce was finalized, 6 months after I had first discovered Michael's affair, I felt a profound sense of closure and relief. The legal proceedings had been emotionally draining, but they had also been empowering because they had given me concrete validation that Michael's behavior had been unacceptable and that I deserved better treatment than I had received during the final months of our marriage. Cooper adapted to our new living situation with the resilience that dogs often demonstrate during major life changes. Our daily walks in the downtown area introduced us to a completely different community than the suburban neighborhood where we had lived with Michael. The urban environment was more diverse and dynamic, and I found myself enjoying the energy and possibilities that came with living in a place where I could reinvent myself without being constantly reminded of my failed marriage. My work performance improved dramatically once I was no longer distracted by the stress and uncertainty of my deteriorating marriage. My supervisor noticed the change and offered me additional responsibilities that came with a salary increase, giving me greater financial security and professional satisfaction. The promotion also provided opportunities for travel and continued education that I had declined during my marriage, because Michael had always found reasons why I shouldn't be away from home for extended periods. Jennifer became an even closer friend during this transition period, providing both emotional support and practical advice based on her own experience with divorce and rebuilding her life. She helped me navigate the social challenges of being newly single after 8 years of marriage, including how to handle well-meaning friends who wanted to set me up on dates before I was ready, and how to establish new routines that reflected my individual preferences rather than the compromises I had made during marriage. The most surprising aspect of my new independence was discovering interests and preferences that I had suppressed or forgotten during my marriage. Without having to consider Michael's opinions about how I spent my time and money, I enrolled in photography classes, joined a hiking group, and started volunteering with a local animal rescue organization. These activities introduced me to people who knew me only as Rebecca, not as Michael's wife or his victim, and who valued me for my own qualities and contributions. Dating was not an immediate priority, but after about a year of being single, I began to feel curious about the possibility of romantic relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. The experience of discovering Michael's deceptions had taught me to pay attention to inconsistencies in people's words and actions, and I found that I was much better at recognizing red flags and trusting my instincts about people's character. When I did eventually start dating, the contrast with my marriage to Michael was striking. The men I met through my new activities and social circles were generally more direct about their intentions, more respectful of my independence, and more interested in building relationships based on shared values rather than convenience or appearance. The process of getting to know someone new without the pressure of immediate commitment was refreshing and educational. My relationship with Michael's family ended completely after our divorce, which was both sad and liberating. His parents and siblings had never been particularly warm toward me, and they quickly closed ranks around Michael once news of our divorce spread through their social circle. I had invested years in trying to build relationships with people who had never fully accepted me, and their abandonment during the divorce confirmed that those efforts had been wasted on people who valued family loyalty over justice or fairness. The financial independence that came with owning my house outright and having a steady income was more satisfying than I had anticipated. Making decisions about home improvements, vacation plans, and major purchases without having to negotiate with someone else was initially strange but ultimately empowering. I renovated the guest bedroom into a home office, painted the living room in colors that Michael had always vetoed, and landscaped the backyard to create a garden space that reflected my own aesthetic preferences. Michael's life took a very different trajectory after our divorce. According to mutual acquaintances, he struggled to establish a new construction business and had to take a job working for someone else at a significantly lower salary than he had earned as a partner in his previous company. His reputation in the local construction industry had been damaged by the circumstances of his partnership dissolution, and potential clients were wary of hiring someone whose professional judgment had been compromised by personal problems. He moved into a small apartment across town and apparently had difficulty maintaining relationships with women once they learned about the circumstances of his divorce. The story of his affair and financial deceptions had spread through our social circles, despite the confidentiality clause in our settlement, and his dating prospects were limited by his reputation for dishonesty and poor financial management. I learned about Michael's struggles through Jennifer and other friends, but I felt no satisfaction or vindication from his difficulties. The anger and hurt that had motivated me during the divorce proceedings had been replaced by indifference and a focus on building my own future rather than dwelling on the destruction of our marriage. Michael's problems were the natural consequences of his choices, and my energy was better spent on creating the life I wanted rather than monitoring the life he had created for himself. 2 years after our divorce, I received an unexpected phone call from Michael asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss something important. Against my better judgment and despite Jennifer's strong advice to decline, I agreed to meet him at a neutral location downtown. I was curious about what he might consider important enough to risk violating the informal no-contact agreement we had maintained since our divorce was finalized. Michael looked older and more tired than I remembered, and his clothes suggested that his financial situation had not improved significantly since our settlement. He apologized for contacting me and explained that he wanted to tell me about some realizations he had come to during therapy sessions he had started after our divorce. He claimed that he finally understood the full impact of his betrayal and wanted to express genuine remorse for the pain he had caused. His apology was more thoughtful and specific than the desperate pleading he had done during our divorce proceedings. He acknowledged that his affair had been a selfish choice that reflected his own character flaws rather than any problems in our marriage. He admitted that his financial deceptions had been tantamount to theft and that he understood why I had been unable to forgive him. Most importantly, he accepted full responsibility for the failure of our marriage without trying to blame external circumstances or stress. Despite the apparent sincerity of Michael's apology, I felt no desire to forgive him or to rebuild any kind of relationship with him. The woman who had been devastated by his betrayal and desperate to save their marriage was gone, replaced by someone who had built a fulfilling life that didn't include him in any capacity. His remorse was probably genuine, but it was also irrelevant to my current circumstances and future plans. I thanked Michael for his apology and told him that I hoped he would be able to build a better life based on the insights he had gained through therapy. I also made it clear that I had no interest in maintaining any ongoing relationship with him, and that our divorce had given me closure that I didn't need to revisit. The conversation was cordial but brief, and I left feeling confirmed in my decision to move forward rather than looking backward. The third year after my divorce brought unexpected opportunities for advancement at work and the possibility of relocating to a larger city where my skills would be more valued and better compensated. The promotion would require moving away from Austin, which meant leaving behind the life I had rebuilt after my marriage ended. But it also represented a chance to start completely fresh in a place where no one knew about my divorce or my past struggles. Making the decision to relocate was easier than I had expected, because I realized that my happiness and success were no longer tied to any particular place or community. The independence and self-confidence I had developed during my divorce and recovery had made me more adaptable and willing to take risks that I would have avoided during my marriage. Moving to a new city felt like an adventure rather than a loss. Jennifer was supportive of my decision to relocate, understanding that the promotion represented both professional advancement and personal growth. She helped me plan the logistics of the move and promised to visit regularly once I was settled in my new city. Our friendship had become stronger and more important to me during my single years, and I knew that geographical distance wouldn't diminish the bond we had built through shared experiences and mutual support. The process of selling my house and preparing for the move gave me an opportunity to reflect on how dramatically my life had changed since discovering Michael's affair. The woman who had been desperate to save her marriage and terrified of being alone had evolved into someone who was excited about new challenges and confident in her ability to create happiness and success on her own terms. Cooper seemed to sense that another major change was coming, but he had learned to trust that wherever we went together would become home. His adaptability and loyalty had been a source of comfort during the most difficult periods of my divorce, and I was grateful that my new job would allow me to bring him along to our next adventure. On my last day in Austin, I drove past the house where Michael and I had lived together for the happiest years of our marriage. The new owners had made changes that reflected their own style and preferences, and the building no longer held any emotional significance for me. The memories of my marriage felt like stories about someone else's life, interesting, but not particularly relevant to who I had become. As I loaded Cooper into my car for the drive to our new city, I thought about the woman who had stood in her driveway 3 years earlier, watching her husband kiss his mistress goodbye. That woman had been devastated and confused, uncertain about her worth and her future. The woman making this move was confident, independent, and excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. The affair that had destroyed my marriage had also freed me from a relationship that was built on lies and limited by Michael's selfishness and dishonesty. The divorce that had seemed like a catastrophe had become the foundation for a better life that reflected my own values and priorities. Most importantly, the experience of surviving betrayal and rebuilding my life had taught me that I was stronger and more capable than I had ever imagined. Michael's attempt to maintain 2 relationships simultaneously had cost him everything he claimed to value. His marriage, his business partnership, his financial security, and his reputation had all been destroyed by his inability to choose honesty over deception. His affair had provided temporary excitement and ego gratification, but the long-term consequences had left him with less than he had started with. In contrast, my decision to investigate his deceptions, gather evidence, and end our marriage had led to professional advancement, personal growth, and genuine happiness. The life I was building was based on authentic relationships, honest communication, and respect for my own worth. The woman who had once begged her husband to choose her had learned to choose herself, and that choice had made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.